Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's book talk, Karma Pakshi and Two Mongol Emperors, Genesis of the Reincarnate Lamas Tradition. I'm Susan Meinheit, Tibetan and Mongolian Specialist in the Library of Congress Asian Division, and on behalf of my colleagues in the Asian Division and the Asian and Middle Eastern Division, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the library. The Asian Reading Room is the access point for over 4 million physical items in over 200 Asian languages. This includes the Tibetan Collection with over 13,000 monographs and the Mongolian Collection with over 13,000 monographs, many of which are relevant for today's talk. Of special interest is the Tibetan edition of the autobiographical writings of the Second Karmapa Karma Pakshi, reproduced from rare manuscripts from the Rumtek collections and published in Sikkim in 1978. For more information about the Asian Reading Room and our resources, please visit our website, loc.gov/researchcenters/Asian. So now I'm happy to introduce today's speaker. Charles Manson is a librarian for the Tibetan Collections at the Bodleian Library, Oxford University, and at the British Library in London. He was once a master woodcarver in London, who then spent several years as a Buddhist monk and meditation retreatant. He later studied at Harvard University, where he received a master's in theological studies. Charles is the author of the Second Karmapa Karma Pakshi, Tibetan Mahasiddha, published in November 2022 in Shambhala Publications' Lives of the Masters series. His current research is on a newly available manuscript of Karma Pakshi's songs. Karma Pakshi is an inspiring and important figure, of course, in the history of Tibetan Buddhism and the early history of contacts between Tibet and Mongolia in the 13th century. But his life and works are little known. In this book, Charles presents the first English translations of Karma Pakshi's autobiography and new research based on a recently discovered manuscript, as well as translations of Karma Pakshi's poetry and teachings. Following the talk, we will have a 20-minute question and answer period, and those attending remotely may submit questions via the Q&A. Please note that this session is being recorded. Any of your comments or questions will be included in the recording as part of the record. So now let's warmly welcome Charles Manson.
Thank you very much. So, greetings, Washington. And for those of you who aren't in Washington or in the Library of Congress, I'll do the Zoom greeting. Silent, yes. As a librarian myself, I'm delighted to be here at the Library of Congress and to convey the results of my research as published in the book on display at the back and here. My sincere thanks go to the Events Committee and those who helped organize this event, many of you, and my particular thanks go to Anne Roddy and to Susan Meinheit. Thank you all that have helped with this, and thank you for coming. And for any Tibetans, either online or here, Trashi Dile. So I'd like to start with a quick overview of the stages of what we should be looking at. The context, geographical and historical, the biography of Karma Pakshi, largely gleaned from manuscripts of his memoirs. The biography constitutes the first half of the book. Karma Pakshi's writings, his poetry, his philosophy, his style, his legacy, the religious and the political legacy, his significance in terms of the modern context. First, the geographical context of the area in which Karma Pakshi operated. From Yining, once known as Amalek, out on the west, you can see on the map, across to Xanadu, and down to the north of Yunnan province and Sopu in central Tibet. He himself came from East Tibet. Most of his traveling was done after the age of 45. He spent most of his, all his early life in East Tibet, and his foreign travel was between the ages of 50 to 65, across deserts, up over high mountain passes, avoiding warfare and bandits, but, as we shall see, not managing to avoid an imperial arrest by Kublai Khan. In terms of the historical context for the region, for a quick synopsis of Tibetan history until the 13th century, written recorded Tibetan history begins with the Tibetan Empire that lasted about 2 centuries, from about 630 of the Common Era to 842, AD, as some people call it, well, most perhaps. It is in this period that the interest in Buddhism flourishes in Tibet for the first time, probably largely due to the influence of the royal court from the early 7th century. Writing is developed, as well as Buddhist notions of morality. It is worth bearing in mind that Buddhism had circumvented the Himalayas in the 2nd century to reach China. So it seems Tibetan culture was half a millennium later in experiencing any notable influence of Buddhist ideals and practices. The date 842 of the Common Era, with the assassination of the Tibetan Emperor Langdama, signifies the end of the centralized power of the empire. And it would seem that Buddhism declined in influence for about a century and a half, until about 1000, when there occurred, to quote, a rekindling of the doctrine from dormant embers. The date 1042, with the arrival from India of Atisha, a great and aged Buddhist master, is a useful marker for the process of rekindling of Buddhism in Tibet. As well as visiting scholars and practitioners from south of the Himalayas, it was a period of heroic Tibetan translators crossing the Himalayas and then down to Nepal and India to seek Buddhist teachers and scriptures and bring back their translations of scriptures and tantras. It was an extraordinary transfer of literary culture across extreme physical barriers and dangers. In the 160 years from Atisha in 1042 until the birth of Karma Pakshi in 1204, there was a progression in building of Buddhist monasteries, temples, and retreat buildings. The map gives a sample of monasteries established in this period from 997 until 1189, a period of 200 years. So it wasn't an explosion of building projects all at once, but nevertheless a noteworthy progression. Of particular relevance to Karma Pakshi's life are the monasteries established in East Tibet between 1147 and 1169, within 50 years before he was born. Karma Pakshi himself was to contribute to building projects, but largely as a repairer and enhancer, rather than as a founder. Some buildings had been destroyed through warfare, some had deteriorated through lack of care, and some through being abandoned. The continuity and growth of any budding monastic institution is probably at greatest risk soon after the respected, energetic, and charismatic first founder has died, when the impetus, the initial energy, subsides. With family continuity, with hereditary succession after a death, the risks of deterioration are perhaps lessened. But with a celibate head of an institution, any father-son continuity cannot be applied. One family solution would be a brother of the deceased, or his nephew might take up the reins. Another solution in the Buddhist context would be that a reincarnation could be identified to succeed. Shortly before Karma Pakshi's time, we have claims of certain people being a reincarnation of a recently deceased significant person, and the reincarnate is usually not related to the deceased leader. So Karma Pakshi gets called the first reincarnation, not entirely correctly, but his subsequent lineage could be called the first lineage that succeeded in continuity. This particular way of achieving continuity in an ecclesiastical context soon spread within Tibet, and indeed further afield to Inner Asia and Mongolia. 400 years later, the tradition had so developed that by 1642, there seem to be a lot of 42s in the history, it was a reincarnate Lama who was head of government, the renowned Dalai Lamas, who ruled Tibet for 300 years until communism came. To return to the 13th century, in the gestation or genesis of the reincarnate Lama tradition, also known as the living Buddha's tradition, Karma Pakshi could be said to be hugely influential. I should like to posit that within his lifetime there were three crucial events that helped in this process. Firstly, in his childhood, after meeting his first teacher. Secondly, in middle age, as he was about to meet Mongke Khan, one of the most powerful people in medieval history. And lastly, as he approached his own death. So at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Karma Pakshi was born in a community living beside the upper reaches of the great Yangtze River in the eastern highlands of Tibet. He was the youngest of 3 or 4 brothers. His childhood name was Chudzin, holder of the Dharma. By the age of 6, he was reading Buddhist scriptures and apparently understanding them. He would earn remuneration from sponsors for reading scriptures aloud in households, so at a young age he was engaged in a merit economy, the exchange of goods for religious good works. At age 11, he set out westwards towards central Tibet to further his studies. However, he did not get so far. On a hillside near a place called Selko, south of Chamdo, he met the meditation teacher Pomdrakpa, who was a disciple of a Drogon Rächen, who in turn was a disciple of a saintly man known as Dusum Khyentse, who had died 22 years earlier in central Tibet. Dusum Khyentse's name means knower of the 3 times, the past, the present, and the future. So Dusum Khyentse could be said to be Pomdrakpa's guru grandfather, or Karma Pakshi's guru grandfather, so to speak. Pomdrakpa's meeting with the 11-year-old, and here I quote from the book at page 12, quote, could be considered an important factor in developing and establishing the reincarnate ecclesiastic tradition in Tibet, the so-called tulkus or living Buddhas phenomenon that became widespread among Buddhist societies of Central Asia, unquote. The evening of the day young Chudzin met Pomdrakpa, Pomdrakpa gave a Buddhist initiation ceremony, and after the event, to quote on page 13, he spoke to Chudzin alone after the gathering had dispersed. Tonight, directly opposite where you were sitting, Dusum Khyentse and all the oral lineage, the Kagyu, appeared clearly. Your karmic tendencies are wonderful. So Karma Pakshi became Pomdrakpa's student. In his memoirs, Karma Pakshi records that one of the main instructions he received in these early days was on the trio of Doha songs by Saraha, an Indian yogi of the 8th century. The song for the king, the song for the queen, and the song for the people. Karma Pakshi himself wrote several eulogy songs about Saraha, in one of which he says, on page 15, to quote, the identity of samsara and nirvana throughout time, the primordial uncreated nature, transcendent Saraha, a supreme being, directly delivered the instructions of the oral lineage. In the Dharmakaya mandala of one's own mind, non-dual mind and appearance are a shimmering reflection. When a yogin of the wisdom realm does not shift from a realm of being effortless, in all going, moving about, lying down, and sitting, they are called a yogin with absolute conviction, spoken from Saraha's wisdom. End of quote. Karma Pakshi also received the instructions on the profound meditation practice of Mahamudra in the Kagyu tradition as formulated by Gampopa in the early 12th century. And thirdly, from Pomdrakpa, he also received instruction in the meditation practice known as Introduction to the 4 Kayas. It's sometimes known as 3 Kayas and sometimes as 5, but I'll just keep to 4, which is linked to certain breathing practices. It was this latter practice which became Karma Pakshi's preferred teaching to give publicly on his travels, and which he says he gave to both Mongke Khan and Kublai Khan at their courts. Once he had received and begun these instructions and practices, he went to the nearby Katok monastery, founded 60 years earlier, of the Nyingma school for his ordination and for more formal intellectual studies. After some years there, he then rejoined Pomdrakpa and proceeded farther south to Markham in order to avoid the danger of Mongol forces. The Mongols had started attacking southern China in 1235. It was at Markham that Pomdrakpa died, and his student admits that after this he became somewhat depressed. A vision recommended he moved further east, and eventually he came to a sparsely habited area known as Pungri, close to Batang. Oh, I've gone too far. Thank you. At Pungri, Karma Pakshi went into retreat for 11 years, enhancing his meditative practices. And you can see ruins there that purport to be from that time. Towards the end of this period, his reputation as a powerful meditator had increased, and he seems to have accumulated many students and fellow meditators, as many as 500. This is over a period of 11 years. It was also at Pungri that he had a dream of female spiritual beings, Dakinis, who taught him a particular tune for singing the compassion mantra of Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum, which many of you may know of. And I have a notation of it here, and we can actually, oops, it's made it move too much. The Dakinis said the singing of this mantra would be beneficial to all, and there are records in later centuries stating that the communal singing of the mantra to the Karma Pakshi tune was widespread. And my thanks to Nick Perry for recording that. Once he decided to leave retreat, Karma Pakshi engaged in repairing and enhancing several monasteries in East Tibet, which his reincarnation predecessor, Dusum Khenpa, had established, some of them almost a century before. It was when he was at Karma Monastery, north of Chamdo, that he was asked to go to Tsurpu Monastery, near Lhasa in central Tibet. This is where his predecessor had died 56 years earlier, in 1193. This is a picture from before 1959. By now in his mid-40s, Karma Pakshi set off for Tsurpu, where again he engaged in repairing the buildings and indeed repairing the community of few monks still in the area. They had become somewhat louche and had taken to drinking alcohol. In this sojourn at Tsurpu, Karma Pakshi stayed for 6 years, consolidating the healing and development of the monastery and making occasional local preaching tours. Meanwhile, in 1255, Prince Kublai Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, was on military maneuvers in western China, proceeding down the western flank, down as far as Dali in northern Yunnan, and then returning north. It was quite a quick expedition. On this expedition, passing by eastern Tibet twice, he had apparently heard of the reputation of Karma Pakshi. So in 1255, an emissary arrived at Tsurpu requesting Karma Pakshi to come to meet the warrior prince. You don't refuse. Yes. And to quote from page 51, however, Karma Pakshi in his memoirs expresses doubts about whether to go. At the time of the invitation, I was in some doubt as to whether to go or not go. Perhaps his thinking, this is still part of the quote, perhaps his thinking was that such a journey would mean interrupting his work of preaching, building, and repairing, and in addition, the risks of dealing with the fiercely military Mongols must have seemed great, end of quote. Nevertheless, with reassurance from a vision of a Buddhist deity, he did decide to leave and headed east to meet the warrior prince. The two men met probably in the plains borderlands of northeast Tibet and West China, in what is now Qinghai province. At first, the visit went well at Kublai's court, and Karma Pakshi gave some instruction on the altruistic behavior and attitude of a bodhisattva. However, fairly early on in the visit, Karma Pakshi had a premonition that there would be conflict and troubles at the court, and a vision of the compassionate deity, Avalokiteshvara, recommended that he go north. You'll begin to notice that every now and again he has a vision and he acts on it. His activities, we don't know whether he didn't act on other ones, but it's often to do with this. So he decided to leave, much to the displeasure of Kublai Khan. Karma Pakshi then went into the Xixia area, Tangut, North China, continuing his proselytizing work and building of Buddhist structures, and thus to Lingwu, where he seems to have had some difficulties with the local populace. But the situation was resolved amicably. In April 1256, he went southwest to Tsongkha, where 700 years later the current Dalai Lama was born, but another vision admonished him to go north. It was at this point that several Mongolian messengers arrived to invite and escort him to Mongke Khan's itinerant court, close to Karakorum, way far north. The invitation to visit, this is from page 59, the invitation to visit Mongke Khan came to Karma Pakshi when the emperor was the current reigning Khan of Khans, the Kagan, of a huge empire extending from Korea to Eastern Europe, a vast enterprise across Asia. Mongke himself had been leading marauding forces in Eastern Europe 15 years earlier, taking a major role in Mongolian invasions of Crimea and Hungary between 1240 and 1241. For Karma Pakshi, the journey from the Xining area northward entailed crossing the Gobi Desert area to Dalanzadgat, approximately 800 miles depending on the route, and then another 350 miles to the Karakorum area, Mongo's imperial capital, end of quote. After crossing the desert, it was as Karma Pakshi approached the Khan's court, the nerve center of the vast empire, that he came to a realization about his connection to Dusum Khyentse. One could say that this was the second of the three main stages in the early development during Karma Pakshi's lifetime of the living Buddha's tradition. The first stage, as we have seen, was the recognition at age 11 of Karma Pakshi's connection to Dusum Khyentse through the vision of his teacher, Pomdrakpa. This second aspect, the unraveling of a riddle about Dusum Khyentse's future incarnation, was to happen at age 52 in Mongolia as he approached Mongke's court. The conundrum that had puzzled Karma Pakshi was that Dusum Khyentse had had memories of his past lives recorded by three disciples in three accounts. He was a knower of the three times, knowing his past and future lives. At one point, Dusum Khyentse had been asked by a disciple what would be the circumstances of his future births. The master gave three instances, one of which was that he would be reborn for the sake of one person. In a Mahayana Buddhist context, this would seem to be contradictory to the Bodhisattva's saintly principle of continuing rebirths in order to liberate all beings, not just one being. It would seem to be a contradiction. Karma Pakshi's intuition as he approached was that the one person he was there for was Mongke, ruler of many peoples, whom if he could influence would have extensive influence over many peoples. Be that as it may, the first meeting Karma Pakshi had with Mongke and his younger brother, Arik Boga, and both their courts, was marked by extraordinary displays of meteors, lightning, and rainbows. Mongke then challenged Karma Pakshi very directly. You can imagine it out on the plains of Mongolia. with this warrior surrounded by other warriors, and Karma Pakshi, perhaps with a few companions, just arrived after a long journey. So Mongke challenged him, saying, "I am the ruler of the world. Get rid of my obstacles." Karma Pakshi replied that he would think about it overnight. It was a very brave response. In the morning, the emperor again demanded, and Karma Pakshi replied in verse, "Indeed, in this imperfect world, never will there be a king like you, whatever any astrologers have said. I myself, Karma Pakshi, seek to counteract your obstacles. So you benefit the Buddha's teaching and all beings, distribute food and wealth throughout the kingdom, repair the residences of the lamas, and make sky offerings with no sense of loss. Again and again, I ask you to set free the people kept in the prisons." Thus, Karma Pakshi was asking, in return for his blessings and spiritual assistance, for policies of social welfare, for religious sponsorship, and for judicial amnesty. According to Karma Pakshi, Mongke agreed to this and consequently used his treasury wealth to help generously the less fortunate. He also sponsored many religious structures. He released prisoners, or perhaps war hostages, on several occasions, and indeed forbade the killing of animals on certain days of the month. The two men, one a charismatic meditator, the other a powerful warrior, seemed to form a bond, and Karma Pakshi gave Buddhist meditation instructions and initiations to Mongke, specifically the Chakra Samvara initiation. But Mongke was still a warrior and was preparing for his invasion of southern China, in effect continuing the project of his grandfather, Genghis Khan, who had died in a campaign in northern China 30 years earlier. At this point, as Mongke headed south with a large army, Karma Pakshi left Mongke's court to travel to the Chagatai capital in the west, near the area now known as Yining or Almalek. You can see it on the map. So it's a tremendous journey again. He was not so successful with the Mongol court there, which was more inclined to Islam, and so he proceeded to return to China along one of the so-called Silk routes. Along the way, he had a significant dream of a huge Buddha, telling him to build a statue of equal height. The dream was important for a grand project in his final years. He met up again with Mongke Khan and his army in the Liu Panshan Mountains, east of northeast Tibet. They bid their amicable farewells. The warrior emperor went further south in China and died from disease in August of 1259. There then ensued a civil war of succession to be the Khan of Khans between the two younger brothers, Kublai and Arik-Burki. During this time of conflict, Kublai issued a death warrant for Karma Pakshi, perhaps because he had been such a favorite at Arik-Burki's court up in Mongolia. However, several death sentences all proved ineffective, and indeed the executioner was so overwhelmed by Karma Pakshi that unfortunately he committed suicide. Kublai Khan relented somewhat and commuted the sentence to exile, so Karma Pakshi spent the next couple of years isolated in an area probably northeast of the location that was to become Xanadu or Shangdu, the fabled city that Samuel Taylor Coleridge included in his celebrated and incomplete poem. In Xanadu de Kublai Khan, a stately pleasure-dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran down to a sunless sea. The area of exile was by a shore, an isolated and apparently an inhospitable environment. But Karma Pakshi seems to have made good use of his time in writing, continuing his Limitless Ocean series of works. Once the civil war had been resolved by 1264, Kublai Khan recalled Karma Pakshi to the location that was later to become Beijing and imprisoned him there. The door of the prison, the cell where he was put, was nailed shut and guards were stationed in rota. Nevertheless, Karma Pakshi managed to get out. He was brought before Kublai Khan, who this time respected Karma Pakshi and released the 60-year-old to return to his homeland, asking for his blessing. Karma Pakshi took his time returning to central Tibet and stopped in his home territory in East Tibet to create statues in the monasteries. He was wealthy now from donations from the Khans. 8 years after his release, he was back in central Tibet at Tsopo. His travels had been for about 17 years, with many adventures, and he had acquired considerable wealth from the Mongolian sponsors. He had not forgotten the dream that he had when traveling the Silk Route, and the dream instruction to build a huge statue. At 60 feet tall, built in metal with medieval technology, in a remote valley, it must have been some feat. Despite numerous obstacles, such as dissension between the parties of workers, which then spread to the kitchen workers, and also a benefactor died, the statue was eventually made and consecrated. Fairly soon, the statue had become a pilgrimage attraction. You can imagine, very few people, well, nobody had seen such a huge statue in that area. In fact, the third primary point about Karma Pakshi generating the reincarnate Lama meme is connected to the visit of a party of pilgrims. The pilgrims had come from Mongol, southwest from Tsopo. Among the party was an itinerant potter, Tönpa Chöpel, and his wife, Jomo Yangdren. At one point, Karma Pakshi took them aside, offered them some clothing and food, and said, on page 109, "It is necessary that you loan me a dwelling place." Tönpa Chöpel was somewhat puzzled, and when he told companions about this episode later, they laughed at him because, being an itinerant potter, they said he had no home, so how could he loan one? It was in the following year that his wife, Jomo Yangdren, gave birth to a child. 5 years later, the child was recognized and confirmed by Ögyempa to be Karma Pakshi's reincarnation. It would seem that in asking for a loan of a dwelling place, Karma Pakshi had been laying preparations for his impending transition from one life to another. This narrative vignette about a future birth was not the only factor in this third point about the reincarnation development. In addition to preparing for the next child, so to speak, the concomitant preparation was for the continuity of the lineage, the transfer of knowledge that the child would need. This transmission was arranged when the renowned traveling yogin, Ögyempa, arrived and spent 3 days at Tsopo. After some initial good-humored testing of each other as yogins, how psychic are you, they apparently bonded, and Karma Pakshi passed on 3 main instructions. One about the mixing and transference cycle for death meditations, as derived from Naropa. Secondly, the introduction to the 3 kayas instructions. And thirdly, a Jinasagara Red Avalokiteshvara empowerment, in which a wordless mind-to-mind transmission is said to have taken place. We do have an account by Ögyempa's student of the event, and who reports at the time that Karma Pakshi said, page 108 in the book, "We too, for many lifetimes, have been master and disciple, and you must look after me again. I will be your student in the sunny south, so now I will, for the sake of all beings, give the Jinasagara empowerment and the essence of the 6-syllable mantra, the Avalokiteshvara mantra, and the introduction to the 3 kayas." Thus Karma Pakshi appointed Ögyempa to be the teacher of his next incarnation, and also indicated the area in which he would be reborn. Preparations had been made for passing on the lineage. In 1282, Karma Pakshi had what seems to have been a type of stroke, but he recovered somewhat, and eventually he died toward the end of 1283, the 3rd day of the 9th month in the Tibetan calendar. The great man had gone. The child of Tönpa Chöpel and Jomo Yangdren was born the following year, and once the child was 5 years old, the yogin Urgyempa came to verify him as the reincarnation of Karma Pakshi and instruct him. Ruth Gamble has written of the third Karmapa as part of the Shambhala series, Lives of the Masters. She includes therein a translation of an account by the third Karmapa of his journey through the Bardo state after Karma Pakshi's death, the Bardo being a Buddhist term for the period between death and the next life. So a third holder in the lineage of Karmapas was recognized as a child, and by the time of the fourth Karmapa, we can say that the lineage has truly developed, and it continues up until today. The unbroken lineage has survived 800 years with 17 Karmapas. Before looking at other aspects of the legacy and significance of Karma Pakshi, if we can turn to some of his writings, in the book we have translations, accounts of his previous lives, on meditation, 2 examples of his narratives, both in verse and in prose, the 24 questions posed by Karma Pakshi to Manjusri in a vision, and the responses. I didn't translate the responses, though. Karma Pakshi's reflections on Tantra, his musings on the virtues of consecration, a song for a disciple, an account of his deathbed song, and a verse narrative summarizing Karma Pakshi's life. It is probably widely acknowledged by those that have read some of Karma Pakshi's works that his style and content of writing can be difficult to comprehend, but at times is very direct. Aside from his memoirs in 7 parts, there are approximately 36 works extant by Karma Pakshi. Many of these works, 18 in all, have the epithet Limitless Ocean, Gyamsotai, in their title, indicating that he conceived of them as being a series. In fact, some of the Limitless Ocean works have therein an outline of the structure of the series. The outline structure appears in his early works, which indicates that he had a planned structure from early on. Those of you who have or will read the book will know that there are several examples of Karma Pakshi's songs interspersed amongst the narrative. I should like to read one song from a manuscript made available as recently as 2015. It doesn't have a title in the manuscript. I refer to it as the 7 somersaults. You'll see why. I imagine it was probably written when he was young. Somersaults are for young people. And you'll see at the end, it refers to sitting by beside the guru, beside the Lama. So it may have been when he was younger. It's from page 16. Within a mandala of clear wisdom abides the master of self-arising realization. Is this not the Dakpo eminent Dr. Gampopa? May the Holy One bless me. The essential value in these quarrelsome times in the northern snowy country is to eliminate the darkness for the 6 classes of beings. Is that not Mahamudra? The Dakpo eminent Doctor's blessing, a Nirmanakaya benefiting beings, he maintained the capital of the oral lineage. Is this not Dusum Khenpa? In the tracks of the Master, the Vajra Yogin has been born, transmigrating in the world with unimaginable fortitude, and practicing Yogin disciplines. Is this not a Yogin without desire? In unlimited pure lands everywhere, explaining phenomenal existence as Mahamudra, overwhelming the lesser vehicle yoga, does he not practice the Mahayana? In unbiased pure lands, the desire-free yogin lives, acting without adopting or rejecting. Is this not the great equanimity? A manifestation that has completed the 2 accumulations, a reign of needs and wants, the gifts distributed without desire and unimpeded, is this not the proper type of clinging? In a song of 7 somersaults, the desire-free yogin at the seat of the Lama Master will sing of experiences that have arisen. I think the 7 somersaults are the questions that were posed. In terms of his legacy, aside from his contribution to the genesis of the Reincarnate Lamas tradition, Firstly, the immediate legacy was to preserve and enhance the buildings that were to house the sacred objects, and also provide for the monks and teachers who would keep the flame alive of the lineage of meditation instructions and techniques, the tantras and rituals of the Kagyu tradition. Karma Pakshi considered consecration to be important, like many, if not all, religions do. So he was energetic in creating and consecrating statues of holy figures. The temples he restored lasted for 700 years until the mid-20th century. One would hope that this temple of learning would last as long. In terms of the lineage of the Buddhist practices, which temples and monasteries house, Karma Pakshi was instrumental in helping secure the transmission of a practice of compassion, the Red Avalokiteshvara, Gyalwa Gyamtso, and also a powerful protector practice, Benak Chen. And he extolled the introduction to the three Kayas practice. There is an added dimension of Buddhist practice that connects right through to the 21st century. Karma Pakshi has been associated with two terma practices, that is, two meditation practices have been inspired by him. They are both known as mind treasures, or termas. One such inspiration occurred in the 17th century to the first Yongey Mingyo Rinpoche, and the ensuing practice, the Karma Pakshi sadhana, has been widely used in North America and Europe and Asia. Because it was much emphasized by the 16th Karmapa on his groundbreaking tours in the 1970s, like Karma Pakshi, in his 50s he was traveling far and wide with his Buddhist message. The other mind terma had been received by Trungpa Rinpoche in 1968. This was the sadhana of Mahamudra, which has been and is extensively used in North America by meditators. Karma Pakshi has also been credited with being an early influence in the Rimé movement, known as the non-sectarian, that developed in the 19th century and continues. However, it is his influence as an early instigator of the living Buddhist tradition that is perhaps his greatest significance. From somewhat tenuous connections, as he was told as a young boy that he was a reincarnation, through to his full realization of his destiny as he approached the court of the Mongol emperor, and lastly, with his ensuring the successful transference to another child, who then was educated and initiated in order to take up the mantle of third Karmapa. The idea of determining the succession of a leader of a main monastery and its satellite smaller monasteries then spread widely in Tibet, with several sects gaining considerable political power and riches. By the 17th century, a combination of religious and secular power was embodied in the fifth Dalai Lama, who managed to achieve governance of most of Tibet, and the Dalai Lamas came to rule for another 300 years until 1959. And most fortunately, the Dalai Lama and two Karmapas, the 16th and 17th, have visited the Library of Congress. But where did this start? The lineages of reincarnate masters. It started with a young boy on the hill, traveling westward to seek knowledge and spiritual development, and then meeting his future teacher who had a vision of who he was. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we go to questions. Perhaps in the house first, should we do? Are you coming, Susan? Are there questions from online?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet.
I'm not sure that's good or bad. Yes.
Okay, sorry, but somebody has to start, so I'll let it be me this time.
Thank you.
That's absolutely fascinating. I'm just curious, it sounds like, I mean, obviously a great deal of influence over the history. To what degree do you feel like his engagement with the Khans how much of this, his legacy and what he has passed down to the future of the world comes through that, or is that sort of tangential to where his real influence was?
Yes. Well, as we all know, the Khans, well, Mongke Khan died soon afterwards. If he had lived, perhaps something different would have happened. When Kublai Khan released Karma Pakshi in about 1264, he did actually ask him to stay with him, but I think he'd had enough. He wanted home. And he had this huge statue to build as well. So perhaps it was the wealth that he gained from the Khans that helped with the building of the monastery that then lasted 700 years afterwards. Perhaps that was the influence that was there, but he didn't. The influence directly didn't last all that long. And besides, I think that Kublai Khan, he also was quite involved with another Tibetan, Pakpa, and that may have been more his interest. Well, it was certainly his wife's interest. She was more interested in Pakpa. But it's questionable how much influence he had as well. Yeah. It's when you give Buddhist meditation and instructions and so forth, it's difficult to know how that feeds through in political and legal terms. But certainly, I wouldn't say that Karmapa. It was almost like he had some influence, but the influence came back through the finances that he gained from it. Yeah. Thank you.
We have one question from the chat, please. Wonderful talk. Was the notion of reincarnate masters current at the time, and was he able to lead the movement, or did he invent it?
Yes, there had been a few before. There's a reference in the notes. There's a good article by Professor Leonard van der Kuyp about some of the earlier reincarnations. But they hadn't really succeeded in being consolidated, shall we say. It might have been, oh, he's a reincarnation of so-and-so, but it tended not to go much further. The point about the Karmapas, Karma Pakshi, was that he really helped establish it. And then the third Karmapa, even more so. It was a building process, really. Was that all the question? Can you repeat it, perhaps? Can you repeat the question?
Yes, there's a comment. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And another comment, congratulations on the book. I've already read most of it, just got it last week. Will you translate more of his works, like the very interesting one that Matthew Capstein drew attention to some years ago?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in his poetry at the moment. As I said, you saw the picture of the manuscript there. And perhaps I've done some work already, and I'll continue working. There's something like 42, it depends how you count it, 42 poems there. And I think that would be, for myself, it would be more interesting. But things may change.
A follow-up question, please. How was reincarnation received at that time?
Right. Well, he was received very well. Whoops. But it does seem to have happened. It hasn't really been tracked terribly well, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong there. But it does seem to have spread really quite quickly. It was almost as though, in social movements or it was almost as though they were ready for it in a way, in the situation. I wouldn't go so far as to say, this is what it needed, but when you think about, I did mention briefly the way that the succession problem is there for monastics. different religions solve this problem in different ways. So I think it would be fair to say that it was received quite well. There did arise disputes, of course, between, is this a reincarnation or is that a reincarnation and so forth, but that's human. But generally it was very well received, and very soon there were, it's even been received by the Chinese government. You can apply and register as a reincarnate. They have a register.
Thank you for that talk. I'm Sandra Bruce. My question is, the huge statue that he built when he left Kublai Khan, did it survive?
No, I'm afraid not, no. I did see, when was it, 1995, they were rebuilding. There is a statue back. They rebuilt the monastery considerably. And they built a large one. It's not as large. Somebody estimated it, I didn't see it finished, 45 feet or so. But it was extremely noisy while they were making it, because it was repoussé. They were beating out the metal to do it. So it was quite, but yes, it was shattered apparently into pieces. Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's a great artwork, perhaps. Yeah.
Got a few more questions in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Are there non-Tibetan sources mentioning Karmapa Pakshi's interaction with the Mongol court, with Mongol writings?
I haven't found any yet, no. And I've asked others to look as well, but I haven't found others apart from in the Tibetan literature. I've based most of the book on his own writings, which perhaps is questionable, but no, I haven't. I would love to find. I've corroborated the Mongke Khan making this rule about not killing on certain days of the month, which Karma Pakshi mentions, and that has been corroborated in the accounts. It was translated by Cleves, I think, Francis Cleves.
Okay, could you please tell us about your research process, such as how you approached getting a handle on the philosophical concepts and the historical source materials, excuse me?
How I approach it? Well, firstly, you've got to translate it, yeah? And that, in that process, it's almost like I suppose, it's a kind of digestion, isn't it? And then you just go back over and over again. If you don't understand it, sometimes you go and consult other people as well. Particularly Tibetans can be very useful for this. I've had some very good friends that have helped with sometimes seeing what you can't see in it. But otherwise, yeah, it's just work, I suppose, until you do. Sometimes something will sit with you. You'll have to sit with it for quite a while, and then you understand it. Some things come very easily, of course, but there are difficulties. Yeah. Hello.
Thank you, Charles. It's
Thank you.
quite enlightening. So the original primary sources that you, of Karma Pakshi's material, are they housed in the British Library, or where are most of his original,
Yes.
I guess, manuscripts?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Thank you. The Namtar, the life it's in 7 parts, is actually it's in Sikkim. It's been seen by people who are still alive, but unfortunately, it's been contained within the. There's been a difficulty about the current Karmapas, and as a result, the the monastery repository got locked down, and it hasn't been, as far as I know, it hasn't been opened. So I've spoken to people who have seen the manuscript in earlier days, but a copy was made in the 70s, and so it's actually on the internet now. So that's the life story. The songs has been published as a reproduction now, in a color reproduction, very nicely, from Chengdu. And then people, it was, if you saw it was in script, yes, manuscript. People have now published it in sort of regular book form as well, and in the Tibetan Pecha form too. But those are all online with the Buddhist Digital Resource Center as well, based in Boston. Extremely useful for scholars studying. Free as well, at the point of use.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Do you think he completely converted the Mongol rulers to Buddhism, or did they accept Buddhism along with their own religious beliefs?
Yes, I go into this a little bit in the book and mention William Rubruck well, he was from what's now Belgium. He was French, I suppose. He was sent by one of the popes. And there's that famous quote that Mongke makes, the religion's God is like, I'm not remembering it precisely now, but like the hand, and the religions are the fingers. So it's like all part of some greater thing. And if you think of Karakorum, with the amount of people there, I mean, there were French jewelers there. There were, I think there was a British person there. There were no Americans, unfortunately, not yet. But the mishmash of religious groups and different peoples, I think that well, certainly Mongke, he did try to maintain a little bit of distance from it. So it is a little bit surprising that he made such a connection to Karma Pakshi, if indeed it's as true as what Karma Pakshi says. We can't corroborate it. Mongke didn't write his life story. But I think that they weren't completely converted. Their mother was Eastern Christian. So there was that influence as well. I think in one of the readings I mentioned the sky offerings. I think that's something more to do with the sort of natural Mongolian beliefs. But no, I wouldn't say that they were converted entirely. But it's hard to say, because Mongke died so soon afterwards. You know, he could easily. He did appoint a Buddhist to be in overall charge, Namo, of all the religions that were in Karakorum. They were contained, apparently, within one section of the city there. And he appointed a Kashmiri Buddhist to be in charge of them. Well, to be the head, I suppose, responsible for them.
Okay, there are many, many thanks for a wonderful presentation. And one final question, can you speak about the challenges, rewards, etc. of the literary translation process of the text? Were you able to consult with other scholars on those challenges?
Will I be able to? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yeah. Well, I hope so. Yes, if they're willing, yes. I would be perfectly willing, of course, yes. I think it's not much point in Googling my name, because you will get somebody else. But if you Google it with Oxford or British Library, well, probably Oxford would be easiest. And please do write if you have a particular question about anything. I can't guarantee a very good answer, but I'll see what I can do, whoever does write, yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you very much. Just curious about the 11-year meditation that you described in your talk today, and I'm just wondering if he left any detailed description of what that meditation consisted of, and was it similar to a long-term meditation that a Tibetan monk would do today? I'm just curious about that part of his experience.
Yeah, yeah. I do, of course, mention this a bit in the book, but he didn't, well, as far as we know, it's not him writing, but certainly there's a slightly tricky thing, is that the third Karmapa was called Rangjung Dorji. Now, Karma Pakshi referred to himself as Rangjung Dorji, so in his own works. So sometimes later, publishers or scribes may have got slightly confused as to who had written a book or not, and that has been a problem. But at the moment, it's thought that the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorji, wrote a short work, from memory, 30 folios or something, maybe 30 pages, 15 folios. No, I think 30 folios, which actually goes into some detail on this. But Karma Pakshi, well, it may have been Karma Pakshi as the Rangjung Dorji, but I've looked at the style of the writing, and it isn't really Karma Pakshi style. It's more, I wouldn't say for absolute certainty, I'd have to look at it more, but my initial conclusion would be that it would be the third Karmapa who wrote this, and that describes, there's an exercise involved as well, and some breathing too. But that hasn't been translated. Maybe it should be.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Library Special Events for hosting this event, the Asian Division, the Asian and Middle Eastern Division, our Zoom audience, and our in-person audience. Thank you all very much.